So this knife reminds me of a superhero crossover film, something that you didn't know you wanted and or needed, but you're quite excited to have it and to be using it and witnessing it. And I'm very interested to see what you think about this knife as I go through my review of the Civivi Pragma. All right, so let's talk hard factors first. Firstly, this knife has a Nitro-V blade with an aluminum handle and pocket clip. This knife comes in at about $57, with the exception being the Damascus steel blade edition, which is at $72, if I'm not mistaken. And as far as opening mechanisms goes, well, you have a thumb stud, you have a button lock, and then if you really want to get funky with a reverse flick, maybe you can use it as such. Strictly speaking, this knife is a folding knife, not a utility knife. However, they've added some utility functions to it, with it being, ambidextrous carry, I guess is a fair way to put it, since there is no pocket clip. You have a carabiner and you have the hole for a lanyard to carry it with. I'll answer a question about the strength of the mechanism in a second. And then there's the blade shape, which I would describe as a Warncliffe shape. However, let me know what you think. I get sometimes confused with what is what. And what can quite possibly be described as the biggest no-duh of the century, this knife is extremely light, coming in at 1.9 ounces. And well, that makes it extremely easy to carry, to pocket. For size, the blade opens like 2.2 inches. Full length, this knife comes in at 5.72 inches. So with the hard factors out of the way, let's talk about the more subjective things, I guess one could put it, which is feel, ergonomics, and size of this thing. So obviously we've talked about this knife is extremely small, and best way to compare it is, let's say, something like a Devo Pony Stout, which honestly is even bigger in footprint, but has a similar blade profile. And as far as small knives goes that are easy to carry every day, I thought this would be a good example of something that could be comparable in a sense, even down to the grooves in the scales for where your hand can go, and it being ambidextrous carry, though for different reasons. We'll talk about the and we'll do some more comparisons in a second. But opening and closing, this knife is, I would say, whizzy, quick, sharp. Well, that was a terrible example of that, but there we go. If you're using the button lock, I would say it takes a little bit of force to compress the lock. Like they almost like have the spring a little bit tighter in order to like keep it closed, which I'm not getting to the question of clipping this up and making sure that the button keeps the knife in place. So now we get into the question, which is strength of the pocket clip. So I have my handy dandy little key lanyard here, and if I was to stick my knife onto there, and this is going to be a bit harder than normal, but if I shake it about, the button lock remains strong enough to keep the blade locked in place. And this can be the same with a backpack if you take it on travel. You can take this knife, shake it about. I've walked around a decent amount of trails with it on my lanyard, on my backpack, and it hasn't gone loose on me yet, which I do believe is, again, down to the strength of the actual locking mechanism we have in there, where it's, I would say, tougher than what mostly Civivi does with their other knives, which have an almost slow, casual opening feel to them, whereas this one is much closer in opening the mechanism to the Devo. So speaking of quick comparisons, so speaking of the Devo, if you care about something like knife acoustics, this knife has a very light, poppy feel to it, whereas the Devo feels like it has more body behind it, let's say. But this knife opens with a lot more intensity and intention than most other Civivis will do. So, in conclusion, for $57 or $73, this knife, I think, is an excellent addition to take on trips, to take to places, whether it be camping or outdoorsing or whatever you might find yourself doing that involves a lanyard and a thumb stud and this kind of feel. That I think this knife is a great utility piece and doesn't cost so much that you care about the wear and tear on it. The blade shape itself is great for cutting, for opening, for usage, and you have several options as well for what you might like depending on what suits your fancy. So let me know what you think of this knife in the comments down below. It's a little bit different than what Civivi normally do, but I think it's a very good different. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.